All right. Welcome to another edition of Pagans Talking Cancer. Um, I am Sam, as you know, the blacksmith and owner of Ravens Keep Forge, but this is a different path. We're not really talking about those type of things today. What we're talking about is um, living with, through, dealing with cancer of all its ugly forms. And I'm very blessed to have a very good friend of mine, Susannah Ravenswing, just going to talk about her journey. Because I think everyone is unique, but there's also a lot of those similarities, regardless of what type of cancer that you have. And Susannah, welcome. Thank you for uh, being open enough to have this conversation, because it's a hard conversation.
It is.
It's a very private, a lot of times, you kind of hold it uh, close. So can you talk about when and how you found out?
My husband and I were traveling in Scotland in the fall of 2014. We had gone over there to do some work associated with my spiritual path and tradition. And I discovered that I had a knot in my throat under my chin. And it so happened that my mom, who also had been through cancer and ultimately succumbed to it, her cancer was found because she had a knot under her chin. So I sat up and kind of took notice of that. And once we got back to North Carolina, I went to my doctor and, you know, talked to her about my concerns. And she said, "So you really want to go ahead and get this checked out?" And I was like, "Absolutely. My gut tells me this is not something to be ignored." And I have really learned to pay attention to my intuition. So she sent me straight away for an ultrasound and a needle biopsy, and I was found to have stage 4B, very advanced thyroid cancer, which had metastasized to the lymph nodes in the area of my throat
Mm.
and my parathyroid glands. They quite quickly scheduled me for surgery and went in and took out my thyroid completely, 11 of the lymph nodes, two of the four parathyroid glands, and then that got followed up with radiation later on. So it was kind of wham bam, thank you, ma'am, as soon as it was found.
Didn't have a whole lot of time to process it.
No, and I think part of that had to do with the fact that my age was advanced and the cancer was advanced, and quite frankly, it really didn't look very encouraging at that point in time. They were playing it very chill, but I know now, having done more research, that that did not bode well.
So how was your, after the fact, how was your relationship with with your deity? How did that did it impact that any?
It impacted it profoundly. Um, Leading up to that, I had already been working a lot with several gods of the Norse tradition, and in particular the goddess Freya. Um, I came through the surgery well, came home, seemed to be doing well, and then went through a crisis where my body couldn't stabilize the calcium and potassium levels. And that is potentially lethal because it can stop your heart. So they got me back into the hospital, started trying to get those levels stabilized. Um, Eric was with me and then had to come home to take care of cats and laundry and all that kind of stuff. And I went into a crisis. The doctors could not get it stable. I was aware at one point that the doctor and the nurse were standing across the room whispering, and that I could tell they were feeling really, really anxious about whether I was going to make it or not. I realized that I was on the brink of dying, and everything started to white out. I felt this sort of sadness for my husband and my children, but I also felt Freya's presence so tangibly. And it was like just this warm, golden embrace. And I could feel her reassuring me, "It's okay, relax, we're going to take care of this." And I went on to have this extraordinary sort of near death experience in which basically I was disassembled like a bunch of Legos. and then put back together and resewn with what I perceived as new neural wiring, golden wiring. And then I drifted off to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, my levels were all stable. Everything was absolutely fine. And I was able to go home soon after that. Um, so my experience of her was so profound and so tangible that I determined that following morning, whatever happened, my life was hers from then on, and that I would serve her in whatever way she called me to. And that is what I have done my best to do.
Yeah, that would definitely change you.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
did being and I'm using pagan as an umbrella term.
Right.
Um, um, did that have any impact, you think, to your treatment while you were in the hospital dealing with any of the medical stuff? Because I know you had mentioned radiation. Did any of that stuff kind of did it play in? Did they even ask? Did it?
So at one point, during a meditation conversation with her, Freya indicated to me that what happened to me was purposeful, that um, I had been carrying a block in the area of my throat chakra that kept me from speaking my truth in the way that I needed to move through the world intentionally and helpfully. And so that this had occurred around that blocked energy, and that the surgery served the purpose in part of freeing it up so I could speak, more authentically and truthfully and forthrightly about important things. Um, and that allowed me to feel, you never feel like, hey, great, cancer showed up. But at the same time, if it serves a higher purpose, it's easier. I mean, for me at least, it was easier to kind of come to terms with this life-changing event if I felt like something positive could come out of it in the long run. Um, so there was that sense of, okay, this is really hard to go through, but it's for a purpose, it's for a reason. And I leaned into that. I think that's maybe the thing that helped me to deal with it, is the idea that this is an initiation, in a very
Hmm.
powerful sense. And initiations typically aren't very comfortable, and they aren't easy, and they take a lot of effort to integrate and come to terms with. And you're never the same on the other side. At least that's my experience of them. Um, so that's how I approached it. And it resulted in, I think, the activation of a lot of my skills that I use in my current practice as a spirit worker, as a shamanic practitioner. Um, just sort of really giving myself into the arms of doing that work. The radiation itself, um, in the northern tradition, one of the runes is the rune Querth, which is the rune of the funeral pyre. And so I experienced the radiation as an opportunity and time to take stock of what I needed to um, let go of in my life, and really
Hmm.
allow that to be burned away. I was carrying a lot of stuff that was not constructive, not helpful for me to continue to carry. I spent a lot of time in therapy, across the arc of my life, and worked on those issues, but there was still stuff that just needed to be burned away. And so it was like a sacred funeral pyre in a way.
Wow.
And so that's the main thing that came out of it. And of course, as you know, there are also all the other kinds of things that are sort of byproducts of chemo or radiation or whatever that we have to adjust to. In my case, numb feet and a hand tremor, and you know, losing teeth, and all kinds of fun things that go along with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a subject that a lot of people don't like to talk about. But I think it's important to mention it at least, is that this is not an inexpensive treatment, and whether you have really good insurance or not, it still doesn't change the fact that it's not inexpensive.
True.
There's a lot of expense involved in it. And I know, a lot of people suffer from the financial end of it, that's just really is devastating, because
Hmm.
you've got not only you're trying to deal with this dreadful disease, but now you've got the impact of the financial part ongoing, because
Hmm.
it's not a, you're not just, well, at least in my case, I'm not just done. There's a continue financial cost of testing, you know, there's, to, the assurity that it hasn't, reared its ugly head again somewhere else. And I think people that they needs to be talked about too, because we had mentioned earlier, we've had several conversations about this, but the community support, I think, as a pagan community could be better
Yeah.
at it. I don't have the answer. I mean, it isn't, this is what we need to do. It's just, I think that, that's for folks that are, a little bit better at that kind of community organizing than I am. But I definitely think that, this is something that we need to work on as a community, because um, it is so hard,
Hmm.
and it doesn't need to be.
I think that it's made harder by several different things. Um, Before we began recording, we were talking about the fact that this umbrella pagan community is not cohesive by any means. We're not talking about people who are gathered together in organized congregations under the guidance of clergy. In some cases, you may have circles or you may have covens or you may have groups that are working together, but it's not coherent at all. It's not organized at all. There's not that sense of here we are as a group of people and we're really aligned in what we believe and we're really aligned in what our values are and our mission and all that kind of stuff. So that's one set of issues. And I think the other set of issues is that an awful lot of people in the pagan community are outliers. They're people who are already struggling with kind of being marginalized, may not have, you know, big incomes, may not have lots of deep resources. And so that's another handicap. Um, and then there's just the whole human thing around our society saying there's certain things we don't talk about. We don't talk
Mm.
about religion. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about illness. Everybody has this sort of pathological independence and, hey, I don't need to ask for help. And the reality is that we only function through Gabo. Gabo is both the name of a rune and it's also a Norse concept of interdependency and collaboration that we all thrive together. And that's a,
Mm.
a huge piece that seems to be missing.
I agree. So, would you like to speak to just the trauma and kind of the physical part and the pain of going through cancer? Kind of what that's like? Do you can you put it to words? I mean, it's yeah.
I think it started for me when I listened to a message that my doctor had left on my phone. I had my phone switched off when she called with the test results. And I listened to the message and she said, "We've got to get you right back in. This doesn't look good." Um, and I think that what we're dealing with here is malignancy. I felt like I was in free fall. I was by myself at the moment downtown in the arts district running some errands. And I remember just standing there, having heard that message and feeling like the earth was falling out from under my feet, like literally I was dropping through space. And I managed to catch my breath and make my way back to my car. And I sat in the front seat of my car and I called Eric and I burst into tears. I just thought, what now? What now? I was so utterly terrified because I watched my mother fight
Mm.
and die from cancer. Um, and hers was a different kind, but it didn't give me a real great frame of reference for what I might experience. Um, the care that I received was excellent. I was cared for by people who were experienced and dedicated. I was a very proactive patient. I'm one of those people who researches everything and goes in and asks 10 million questions and, all that kind of stuff. So that part of the experience, the care and all, was really good. I felt like I was seen and heard, and I have no qualms with speaking up if I don't feel seen and heard. That's one of the things that I've learned as an elder is that I have to, I'm responsible for ensuring that. Um, the actual surgery, while it was quite long, it was an 11-hour surgery. I recovered from that surprisingly quickly. Um, the aftermath, going through the near death experience, was far more traumatic because it really did change um, how I interact with the world in ways that are hard for me to describe. I've always been extremely intuitive and sensitive and empathic. Um, but this turned that up, many, 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 many times. It was like Freya had installed a giant satellite dish on top of my head, and there was just the bandwidth. My spiritual bandwidth had been expanded by that experience so profoundly, and it took me several years to adjust to that and to get to the point where I could screen appropriately and filter appropriately and manage that, kind of heightened sensibility or sensitivity. Um, Tremendous fatigue, brain fog. Your thyroid gland is a master gland, so it's responsible for telling lots and lots of different body parts how to function and what to do. And while they tell you that the medication will pick up the slack and do the same thing, it really doesn't. At best, it's sort of a half-assed substitution for what your own body would produce. So there's been a real adjustment to that. And then following the radiation, like I said, there were lots of sort of auxiliary side effects that went along with that. Um, the treatment involved swallowing a radioactive liquid that would be taken up by the thyroid cancer cells if any of them were scattered around in my body. But because that had to go through my mouth, it affected my salivary glands and dried them out. And when you don't produce enough saliva, you start to lose teeth. So I've had thousands and thousands of dollars worth of dental work done, nothing to be done except just deal with it. It impacted my eyesight, and I developed a hand tremor. A hand tremor wouldn't be much of an issue, except I spent 50 years of my life being a gold and silversmith doing incredibly tiny, fine, fiddly work. And I could no longer hold my torch steady or hold my soldering pick steady. I could not manipulate things in the same way that I could before. And I loved what I did for a living. I was passionate about it. I'd spent half a century building up my skills and building up my client base, and I just had to come to terms with the fact that that wasn't work that I was going to be able to continue to do. The other piece of it was just the pain of how everybody responded, because as soon as the word went out, it was like everybody went, and by everybody, I mean literally everybody except I told you and Julie, and you. I told you right after I'd been diagnosed, and you both were wonderful and loving about it. And my twin sons and my husband. And beyond that, I don't have much family, but Eric's family, friends, people we thought of as spiritual family, they just vanished. It's like, oh, we might catch this from you somehow, or just an awkwardness or a discomfort around asking, what do you need? Also, people saying pro forma, what do you need? What can I do for you? But not really meaning it, and sometimes you don't know what you need. You know this perfectly well, that, people say, well, what can I do for you? And you're just sitting there. It's all you can do to be vertical. You can't even make words coherently. And so that part can be very difficult too.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is just our culture.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's a
because
big part of it.
our culture as a whole, regardless of what path that you're on, is we don't deal with death and dying at all.
And yet
I
we should.
remember,
I mean,
yeah, but we don't. I mean, it's
yeah.
just, I mean, my beloved's in the hospice, so I mean, I kind of get that end of it. But I remember, 1976, I never will forget it. I was sitting around the table with my mom and aunts and my grandmother, and my grandfather had just been diagnosed with cancer, and they whispered it, he's got cancer. It's like you couldn't even hardly even say it out loud, and I think there's that stigma that's still attached to it.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think people don't know how to react, so they don't. Yeah,
Yes.
I think it's probably I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to, and I think think that's probably it more than anything else because I can't imagine you know people purposefully shying away or turning away. I think they don't know. And speaking to your point, being in the midst of it, you don't know either.
Right.
Because you're just in survival mode, whatever that is. Even if it's, okay, well, I sat up today in bed,
Right.
I need a gold star.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
spent about 7 months just curled up on the couch under 5 or 6 blankets because I could never get warm with my cats piled on top of me and the TV on in the background. Just it all ran together. It was just kind of a blur.
Yeah.
There's another piece I want to mention too, and that's this weird new age thing that I kept running into. That somehow, if you were perfectly aligned with truth and light, your body wouldn't have done this. And so you have this wretched illness as a result of the fact that you haven't dealt with something or you're carrying some kind of
Yeah.
something.
This,
And as a shamanic worker, as a spirit worker, I get clients who come to me who go, what kind of evil spirit am I carrying that put this in my body? And I want to go to them. It makes a whole lot more sense to just assume that it's a random biological process than that you're carrying some sort of evil spirit.
you don't need to be exercised. It's just sometimes life sucks.
Well,
It's
and people want a quick fix. I think a lot of people want a pill, a magic bullet, something. Let's just do this, woo woo thing and have it be gone. And it's not always that simple.
life doesn't really work that way. Did you notice any um scents or smells or anything like that helped or didn't? Were there some that you were used to that really kind of,
I know that I went through a long period of time where food just didn't have any taste,
mm,
that it because it had impacted my salivary glands, that everything just sort of tasted like library paste, and I
ugh.
really didn't have much in the way of an appetite, and swallowing was kind of uncomfortable. But in the positive sense, um, being in nature really helped me, and that's always been a place that I go to when I need to ground and recenter myself and be restored. It's a place where I recharge my batteries. My cats, I'm a cat person. You guys are cat people, you know what I mean. Just having 4 or 5 little beings who want to lay on top of you and pour their healing energy into you, that was incredibly important. I had a kitty at that point in time who was really a soul cat, and he would come and sit on me every day with, just right on my heart, with his face right in my face, and just look at me and slow blink and purr and heal me. And he was very intentional about it, he was very
Yeah.
deliberate about it. And I will always cherish that he gave so much time and energy to his person that way because it was very clear he was doing it deliberately.
Yeah, I had one of those too.
I'm glad. I'm
Yeah.
glad you did. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what about, because I struggle even now a little bit, because I'm still within, fairly recent.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
you are.
um, being able to work and raise energy through that time period, was there anything that you noticed about being able to or not? I know for
Um,
me, I just kind of felt dead. Not
mhm,
dead, just numb. There was just
mhm.
I just, yeah, I just, I got zipped. It was all the energy I had just to, blink a lot of times.
For me, it it threw me into the spiritual process in overdrive. Um, During the spring, right before I was diagnosed, I was engaged to help create a piece of a shamanic breastplate for an individual who's an elder in the Northern tradition. And at that point, my involvement in that tradition was still very new and very tentative. I was just kind of learning about it, but I felt really strongly guided to help create this piece. And so the arrangement that I had made with this elder is that if they would provide the silver, I would offer my work in exchange, and I would ask that while they were coming through on a teaching tour, they stay with me for a couple days and just let me ask questions and learn from them. So that was the arrangement we had. And it turned out that they were coming through in the period between when I'd had the crisis where Freya rebuilt me and when I was to have radiation therapy. Very fertile ground. And I'm very clear about the fact that my holy powers engineered this particular sequence of events, so that it worked out that way. So while he was present visiting with us, he did a lot of energetic work on me that helped prepare me to receive the radiation in a way that would be both therapeutic and productive, and invited me into an apprenticeship. And so once I actually came out of the 5-day isolation that you have to follow when you have this kind of radiation treatment, I kind of hit the ground with boots running, and immediately my therapy is to do things, to make
Mm.
things, to stay busy. And so with whatever energy I had available, I read books and I wrote papers and I did ceremonies and I made sacred tools. And, so I took my anxiety and channeled it into doing, which is
Mm.
how I cope. Some people freeze and curl up in a little circle, and I did some of that too. Um, I think if anything, the whole experience for me was like the preparation for the life and work that I am in now, which I realized in looking back, the rest of my entire 72-year lifetime has prepared me to do the work that I do now as a spirit worker, as a shamanic practitioner, some would say shaman.
So, looking back on it now, do you still, I'm assuming you're still feel like me, you're still kind of undergoing testing throughout the time. Do you have, excuse me, any fear kind of attached to any of that as the ongoing and any of those little nagging things in the back of your head?
Not so much. I've got a really, really wonderful endocrinologist who I've been with for the 10 years since my cancer. And when we were 5 years out, he said to me, okay, your numbers look really good. At this point, you are far more likely to develop randomly some other kind of cancer than you are for the thyroid cancer to recur in some other place in your body. So I think that that's not something, I can't say that it wouldn't happen, but it's
Mm.
very, very unlikely. So, I have to have my thyroid levels checked annually, and I go through a thyroid ultrasound, every few years, and everything has been totally clear. Um, I'm much more aware of my mortality than I was before I went
Mm.
through cancer. And some of that also has to do with my age and the fact that I'm approaching the age my mother was when she had cancer and passed. So that is in the back of my head. I find myself thinking, okay, next year is the year. If will I live, a year longer than her, 2 years longer?
Mm.
My health is good at this point, and I'm pretty active. But I think that's where the little niggly thing is for me is will I live as long as my mom? Will I outlive my mom?
Thank you.
Yeah.
These are kind of hard conversations, and I think it's important that we, start having them.
Hmm.
Um, as pagans, we don't have a lot of these resources, and I hope that, this becomes something that helps somebody else, to
Hmm.
where, whether they speak out or want to speak out, or they're in the middle of it, or it's their journey with cancer is just starting, that, these will be a comfort, you know. I know for me, when I start, I had no expectation, had no idea what was going on. Mine happened a lot like yours. It was a whirlwind. You know, woke up to, after surgery, to, oh well, you had cancer. We hope we got it all. And then a few months later got diagnosed with the second one. And then had to go through all that. So it's, everybody's, what I'm finding out is everybody's journey's different, but there's a lot of similarities at the same time.
I think that's very, very true. If there's anything that I would speak to, um, it's to ask people to be aware of the profound vulnerability that a person is experiencing as they're undergoing this. It's a frightening, traumatic experience, but that can be made so much more traumatic if people are insensitive in how they deal with you. One of the experiences that I had was that a community that Eric and I had been very much active in and had helped with the founding of and the growing up of and the building of. Um, there were some people in the community who had an issue with how strong my personality is and how forthright and bluntly spoken I am. But rather than talking to me about that, they waited until I was vulnerable and dealing with an illness and basically blackballed me out of the organization while I was in isolation after radiation therapy. That gave me no opportunity to ask, what's the issue? How do we fix this? Can we address this? There was no chance of repair or healing or anything. And it felt like a double wound.
Mm,
And there is still a great deal of pain and anger around how that was handled because it could have been handled in ways that were so much healthier. Um, in our pagan community, we have a lot of folks who are outliers. There are folks who don't fit in with society at large. They don't choose to fit in with society at large. They're not conventionally socialized. And all I want to say is, people, please do your own deep work. Do your own healing work. If you're carrying baggage, if you know you're carrying wounds, get some help. Find a good therapist. Find a spiritual counselor. Do something, but do your own deep work. Because if you don't, hurt people hurt people.
yeah.
And I just want to ask people to please consider that and take responsibility for that piece because our community really needs it.
What do you think? That brings up a point that we kind of talked about it a couple times. Is in the midst of this, how do we, as those that are going through this, how do we ask for help? Because I know, it's not something that being raised Southern Appalachian, you don't ask for help.
Yeah, we're taught to be pathologically independent.
Just rub some dirt on it and drive on. You'll be all right.
Right. Yeah, just buck
I mean,
up.
seriously, I
Just
mean,
buck up.
it's hard. I have a hard time asking for help for simple things. I mean, you know me. It's something. If I ask for help, it's usually something pretty big. And how do we do that?
Part of it means being willing to be even more vulnerable when you're already about as vulnerable as a person can be. Because what if they say no?
Yeah.
What if they're not willing? And I think that's one of the things that stops us. We're already dealing with illness, possibly surgery, possibly really invasive or traumatic treatments. And so we're about as vulnerable as a body can get. And then to turn around and have to go even deeper into vulnerability and say, I'm really struggling and I can't drive myself to this appointment. Is there any chance that, you or someone might be able to drive me to my appointment? Or I just really can't cook for myself. Could you get some people to put a meal train together? You know, and some of it is even knowing anybody to ask. I mean, we found ourselves so actively isolated that there was no one we could have asked, even if we'd been inclined to.
Things that we need to fix.
Yep. And realizing that it's not just about finding the physical strength to come through the illness, but also doing our own deep work around vulnerability, around being willing to ask others to help, and being willing to push through the vulnerability of asking for help and risking
Mm.
rejection.
Yeah, that's hard.
It is. It
That's
is.
hard. And I think we can all be better. No, those of us, it's kind of hard to say, I'm going through all this and I still have to do more.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't
Mm-hmm.
surviving enough? You know, but yeah, I mean, it's, and to speak to your point earlier, about, it is looking back, looking at it now, even as I'm kind of in it, there is a lot of initiatory type with it. I'm still in the middle of it. I'm still, dealing with all the side effects and fatigue, and I'm still I thought it would be, done by now, but oh no, but wait, there's more. You know. But yeah, I think, maybe something like, yeah, hopefully this helps.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the folks that are in the middle of it to go, I need to reach out to folks and say, hey, I need help. It's okay. I don't, that's what community's for, and if they don't know how, maybe it's, me voicing, hey, this is how you can help,
Right.
because I,
Right.
I think people want to, they just don't know how. So they don't, like I said, they don't do anything. It's that kind of paralyzed, asset, you know, they don't want to, yeah, it's
Well,
hard.
you had asked me to talk a little bit about things that were helpful, and I don't think I responded very well to that question. Specifically, things that I found helpful besides my connection to nature and to my cats. I had body work a lot. I worked with a woman who was a very, very adept massage therapist and a very psychically sensitive person, somebody I felt very comfortable with being vulnerable around. And just to be able to lay still and have caring touch that was not eroticized, that was just loving and gentle. That was wonderful. Music, I really dove deep into music that was healing and calming. And that's going to be a different thing for every person based on
Mhm.
their particular musical preferences. I built up a lot of soundtracks that combined music that I loved with nature sounds. And times when I had no energy at all, I would just lay on the sofa next to the wood stove with the earbuds in and just let that wash through me. And the other piece was, my faith. I have very deep and profound spiritual faith. I don't impose it on anybody else, but it is a thing that really, truly has anchored and aligned me in my life through almost all of my adult life. I've been under that pagan umbrella since way back in the '80s, so a very long time, and it really cemented my connection to the Northern tradition and the paths of my Norse and Siberian ancestors. And so I've really gone deep into that and seen what I went through with cancer as part of that initiation that prepared me to do the work that I will do until I leave this body and go wherever the great mystery takes me.
Any parting words?
Be gentle with yourself, be forgiving with yourself. Um, Try to be brave and ask for what you need if you can figure out what you need.
That's the million dollar question.
Yeah.
A lot of times you just don't know. Thank you.
Thank you for asking these questions and for initiating this conversation in our community.
See you, everybody.
Lots of blessings.